reserves. On the other hand, though, that's this second point that I bring up is not obligatory. We could abide by it. It isn't incumbent upon us to violate the fractional reserve system in that case. But it is a fractional obligation to abide by non-fractional. But abide by the obligations to sustain our circulation, which only equaled our reserves. On the other hand, in the first case, where we're attempting to abide by a precious metal monetary system, we absolutely have to violate the ostensible obligations to abide by a reserve if we are going to sustain further industry and if we are going to attempt to maintain circulations which relate to the production of that industry as they related to the production of prior industry, so that we maintain a relatively consistent and sustainable volume of circulation. So more so than usury, even a precious metal or finite monetary reserve system, which would result in a finite circulation, that compels us to resort to fractional reserve policy, because in no other way can we even come close to rightly monetizing our production, so that we give a relatively consistent value to every unit of circulation. Now, in the case of mathematically perfected economy, you are achieving the necessary objects and eradicating the only cause of resorting to a fractional reserve system in the precious metal monetary or finite monetary standards, because you are freeing yourself to monetize whatever production you're capable and desirous of producing, and the eradication of interest, which comes in the wake of restoring the right of an individual to issue his own promissory obligation without the intervention and exploitation of the banking system, which they do through a kind of a like entity, which I call a common monetary foundry. In conjunction with this...
Can you just elaborate a bit on that? So it's okay for an individual to lend money plus for interest?
No, no. I'm saying actually quite the opposite thing. Yeah. I'm saying that the actual situation between the real creditor, in the case of our $100,000 home, and the debtor, or as I prefer to call them, the obligor, is this.
It's not a bank. Let's just say it's two people.
Well, the thing is, if we restore the right of the individual to issue the under the banking system, the individual is issuing their promissory obligation. The bank's just insisting that it only be printed on their paper.
Yeah, but that's obviously because of the fractional reserve scenario.
Well, no, it isn't because of that. Fractional reserve, what I just explained amounts to this instead. That fractional reserve is an incidental consequence in the case of a currency subject to interest. And in the case, and it's an inevitable consequence of attempting to maintain the integrity of and consistent value in the circulation in the case of precious metal monetary standard or a finite monetary standard of any kind. So in both cases, nonetheless, what fractional reserve is not something which is causative. It's in fact a consequence of the underlying root faults of the either concept of monetization. So I'm saying that if you think that you can apply a precious metal monetary standard and preserve this quote unquote honest principle of honest money unquote, if you think you can do that in a precious metal monetary standard or any finite monetary standard, you're absolutely wrong.
Well, can you define finite? What do you mean by finite?
Finite means relatively limited and less than can, particularly in the case that it's less or more than would have sustained the production and remaining value of prior production at a certain ratio. See, if during the 1800s we had this tremendous industrial revolution on through the 1900s and present. Now, if we took the original monetary reserves, and granted a certain amount of new gold is found every year, but still the volume of gold is relatively static, as we call it in software engineering, as compares particularly to the vast increases of industrial production. So, if we have a volume of gold G, which will sustain a currency G, a circulation G, and original industry at that time indeed had a production and a remaining value of the production, which we might call RV1, remaining value 1, that equaled G, then everything's got its value at the beginning of such a system. Well, let's just say that 10 years down the road, owing to vast industrial improvements in natural improvements in industrial production, instead of RV1, we have an RV10 10 years down the road, which in fact is, let's just say, 7 times RV1. Now we're asking the remaining value 1, let's just say for sake of simplification that RV1 is still the same, although it's been consumed and depreciated, plus RV10, which is 7 times RV1, and let's just say RV1 depreciated by half, just to make it simple. So we actually have an RV1 which is now 1/2 plus RV10, which is 7, or 7, and we have a demand for 7.5 times the circulation if we're going to represent wealth in a like manner. The reason that we can't do this is because the original monetary reserves, which allow a circulation of G, can't represent the production of RV10 plus RV1, remaining value 1, which is now depreciated down to 1/2, so we have a total of 7.5 times what we originally had. We have actually 7.5 times the remaining value of existent production competing for the same currency G. Now, if, for instance, we can shoot this out of the air that it's possible to do things likewise in the same manner by simple example in which we trade all wealth at once. What happens? Well, you can't possibly do so at RV10, because only G exists, and we have a need for 7.5 times G in order to represent all of the wealth. There's no representation by which to trade it, so we can't even do it via the currency. And, excuse me, mathematically perfected economy is a resolution of this issue. And I regularly explain this with an example. I'll just throw this at you. This example relates to much more than might meet the eye in the beginning. It relates to the purported need for velocity in currency. In effect, it's a proof that no, velocity is immaterial. It's irrelevant. That volume is a critical issue, and in fact, volume can't properly be represented anyway. But let's just say, excuse me, there are 1,000 of us. And we are, we're all in a circle facing the center of the circle. And each of us are working on production, and each of us have $10. And there's a period of time that relates to this. Doesn't matter what it is. But at the conclusion of this period of time, whatever it is, we turn to our left, deliver our own production to the person on our left, who takes it and gives us, for our production, their $10. Each of us has $10. Well, basically what we're exemplifying is that a circulation equal to the relative value of existent production at any time, a circulation equal to that allows us to do something, which is to exchange all production at the same time, which is just a case of commerce or commercial activity, which any diligent person in purporting to offer up a solution would have examined. Okay, because you always examine the extremes and you find the limitations of what can be sustained, and you do the math over again and see if your principles have sustained your objects throughout that potential case. And it's possible, of course, that we might want to trade all wealth at one time. It's possible that we might want to save so much of the circulation. Can the commerce that we need to sustain still be sustained? We examine all these cases. So this is one of the cases which it's incumbent upon us to examine the ramifications on. Nonetheless, at every period of time, indeed, with a circulation equal to the remaining value of our production, which is sort of described in unrealistic terms, but which are simplified to a situation which emulates what we need to emulate to analyze this. We don't have to say, well, you produced more. Well, we might have consumed as much. And, actually, this case is accountable for all those cases as well, as we can see easily if we are mathematicians. But, this is a simple case where, in fact, at every period of time, we can exchange all our production with each other, be justly rewarded for it, without any encumbrance, impediment, obstruction whatsoever. Now, let's just take $5 away from every fifth person in this circle now and try to execute the same transaction, which could have been executed across 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 1,000,000 people or 100 million people or billions of people. Now, it goes 5 people and it stops dead because that person doesn't have $10 to give to the person to their right for their production. It stops dead. Moreover, we can observe that that person has to go elsewhere about that circle, do $5 worth of additional work above the 10 that they've already done in order to earn $5 which simply didn't exist, quote unquote, somehow, so that they can perform their step. Once they have done that, then we can proceed 5 more people until we run into the same situation, which requires that 10th person to do additional work likewise. We can also observe why must they do the additional work. Somehow, quote unquote, doesn't matter how, they've been deprived of just reward for their production because not enough circulation exists relative to their production to sustain the commerce which might transpire in relation to it. Well, how can this happen? Well, it certainly happens as a result of interest. It certainly happens as a result of interest multiplying artificial indebtedness and the maladisposition of the circulation, which exists likewise, because that $5 might instead exist even, but be dedicated to servicing an increasing sum of artificial indebtedness. But this shows, too, that if you have a volume of circulation which equals representative wealth, the volume of wealth that we need